um, fear is a kind of inevitable part of practice, and people have been talking to me a lot about fear lately, that there's a lot of fear in the world for many different reasons. So I'm going to talk a little, I'll give a little overview about fear, and then we'll talk more specifically about particular fears which are arising in the world and here. And the first question I have is about your own experience of fear, right? Are you aware when you're afraid? Anybody here ever get afraid? Okay, it's okay. Anybody here not get afraid? Okay, so we're in the right group here. Um, um, so uh, what brings up fear for you? And this is just for you to reflect on for a moment. What brings fear for you in your life, in your world, in your experience? Where do you observe it arising? Is it in the morning or the afternoon or the evening or any time? What kind of situations bring up fear in your life? Is it personal? Is it social? Is it online? Or is it um, uh, in very specific situations that you get afraid? And how do you experience it in the three centers? How do you experience fear in your body? Do you notice that when you're afraid? What's happening in your body when you're afraid? And of course, fear is a feeling, it's an affect, it's a heart center. And so how do you experience it emotionally? How do you experience it when you're afraid? And of course, how do you experience it mentally? Because there's often a lot of thoughts and a lot of thinking, both that stimulates fear or the thinking is stimulated by the fear. We have a lot of thoughts when we're afraid about what's happening and what's wrong and why it's wrong or why we're afraid or what to do or a lot of papancha. Anybody here not know the word papancha? You don't know it? Okay, it's an important word to know. It's a great Pali word. It means proliferation of mind, papancha. It sounds like what it is, papancha. It just keeps going, the mind keeps going. I get afraid that I'm not going to have enough money today to take the muni. And it's like, oh, where did the money go and where did I put it? And oh, I know where I can get it. And okay, but well, my friend loaned me $1 so I can get on the Muni. And, and yeah, why do they charge so much the Muni? And whoever set up the Muni? Why don't we have free travel in America? And I remember I went somewhere, papancha, when in fact it's just thought. And it's not necessarily bad thought. It's not necessarily good thought. It's just thought doing itself, papancha. And it's usually one of the important things. Actually, I love the word papancha. I love talking about it. It's I can start papanchiating about it. And I just made up that word, so that was good. I never said that before. But what I mean by that is, what do I mean by that? um, I so appreciate the word pancha because it's so much part of our reality. We think it's normal, and it is normal, not abnormal, but it's also we don't need to believe it. It's just papancha most of the time. Oh, I know what I want to say. And what it points to is there's something energetically happening, and that's what stimulates the papancha. Fear can stimulate papancha. Hatred can stimulate papancha. love can stimulate papancha. Have you ever noticed that when you fall in love and you can't stop thinking about the person? And then they have totally forgotten about you already, and it's like, and it's papancha. I'm saying it's not good or bad, but it's just thought that happens on its own, and we get enamored with it. So how do you experience fear, emotionally, physically, mentally, and how do you practice with it when you're afraid? Fear comes in many forms, right? And relationship is one of the prime stimulants of fear. And it can be in work relationships, if your boss gets mad at you, or if your employee gets mad at you, or if your colleague doesn't like what you did, then it can stimulate some kind of fear, anxiety, or worry. And of course, in any friendship or intimate family relationship, people we're close with, we can get afraid. We can get afraid they're going to be unhappy or won't like us or won't, get what they want. Or, I was just visiting my daughter, and she's working in London, and she got this apartment. She said, "Oh yeah, Dad, you can stay with me. I got a 2-room apartment," and blah blah blah. And so I stayed with her, and it was great. But she was so unhappy with the apartment for other reasons, because it was noisy and it wasn't supposed to be noisy, and so the worry that, oh, she's not going to be okay. Dad can worry about daughter. That happens sometimes if you have a child. You may have noticed that. Mm. And of course, not the prime, but a prime source of fear is around money and resources and being okay and being safe, right? And meaning having enough for food and housing and clothes and whatever we need, which, a lot of the uh, political world right now has been about money. And what is it? I can't remember what it's called. What are the tariffs? Is that what's happening? Oh yeah, and how much are things going to cost now because of this tariff or that tariff? And it can create a lot of fear and worry, which maybe you've noticed that in the newspaper somewhere. Right? And then, of course, fear comes relationally with people we think are other than us or different than us or not the same as us. And they may not be, but there's almost an instinctual kind of human response when you get out of the tribe that you're comfortable with, whatever that tribe may be. And fear can be exasperated when wars start. Have you noticed that? Right? Anybody notice that there was an attack yesterday? Did anybody notice that? And did you have any reaction to that? Right? Did you notice any concern or fear or worry or distress in that way? And it's part of our current reality that many different things uh, stimulate fear, right? Like, the climate, for one thing, in ecology is one of the things that has many of us afraid about the planet and the world. And then politics in general, with the polarization and the authoritarianism that's happening in this country and around the world, it can be very scary. And and I'm just laying out some of the fear terrain. But really, what I want to, not really, but also I want to say a little bit about how it's thought of in Buddhism. This is from Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who is a Buddhist monk, teacher I've worked with for many years, who I like. And he's very traditional. He says this. He said, the most unskillful response to fear The most unskillful response to fear is when perceiving dangers to our own life or property, we believe that we can gain strength and security by destroying the lives and property of others. Of course, this is how wars start, right? It's to try to be secure and safe, right? He goes on, he says, the delusion pervading our fear makes us lose perspective. If other people were to act in this way, we would know they were wrong. But somehow when we feel threatened, our standards change, our perspective warps so that wrong seems right as long as we're the ones doing it. And that's a very common delusion that happens. Everybody thinks they're right. You ever notice that? That when you're having an argument or a fight with somebody, you think you're right? And you may be, but they think they're right and they may be. And what happens when you get two rights? You get problems. So, and he goes on, if other people would act in this way, we would know they were wrong. But somehow, when we feel threatened, our standards change, our perspective warps, so that wrong seems right as long as we're the ones doing it. This is probably the most disconcerting human weakness at all, our inability to trust ourselves to do the right thing when the chips are down. If standards of right or wrong are meaningful only when we find them convenient, they will have no real meaning at all. And I know for myself, I see there are many different forms of fear or worry or anxiety or trepidation or angst that happen. And they're part of the terrain of being alive. And most of us, and I'm including myself, are often afraid of fear. You ever notice that? That we get afraid and we're afraid that we're afraid. Krishnamurti said it this way. The moment you try to free yourself from fear, you create a restraint against fear. The moment you try to free yourself from fear, you create a resistance against fear. Resistance in any form does not end fear. What is needed, rather than running away or controlling or suppressing or any other resistance, is understanding fear. That means watch it, learn about it, come directly into contact with it. We are to learn about fear, not how to escape from it. And so he's really pointing, this is Krishnamurti, he wasn't a Buddhist, he was a Hindu teacher, but he's pointing at how we practice with it by learning about it, understanding it, coming into harmony with it, not just avoiding it. We want to directly experience the fear and know it somatically, kinesthetically, energetically, so we can really learn about it in the lived sense of what happens when we're afraid, and then what's here that's aware of the fear that is not afraid. That clear what I just said? No. If Lloyd says no, it's a no. And what I'm saying is the awareness itself is the place of freedom of fear. It doesn't mean we're getting rid of the fear. We're being aware of the fear. And what is aware of the fear is not afraid. It's awareness. And awareness is not afraid. We get afraid, but awareness doesn't have any affect. And so we can be aware of it and we can start to create this. It's what one of my colleagues often says, stepping back from the fear and being aware of it, even as we know it somatically, kinesthetically, and energetically. So we know it in a felt sense, an embodied way, but we're not cathected to it. We're not just mesmerized by it or entranced by it. We're aware of it. And when I looked up the word fear in the thesaurus, it said consternation, anxiety, dread. That's actually a lot of great words for fear. So just feel into them a little. Anxiety, dread, apprehension, fright, horror, panic, disquietude, foreboding. And then physically, when we're afraid, there's different adjectives that describe how we shrink or cringe or cower or quake or shake or doubt or run or tremble. And it's a powerful emotion and mental state, both. And there's a paradox in working with it directly in the Dharma. And this is a quote from Walter Brueggemann, who just died. I tend to read the obituaries, which is how I learned about Walter Brueggemann. And so he died, so I was reading his obituary, and he wrote a book called uh, The Prophetic Imagination. The Prophetic Imagination. He wrote this book, let me think, 20, 40, 57 years ago, something like that, which I'd never heard of. He's a Christian minister, but he wrote this book called The Prophetic Imagination. And he had this great line that I loved. He said, energy comes from the embrace of the inscrutable darkness. Energy comes from the embrace of the inscrutable darkness. And it really, as I understand it, there's a certain kind of energy that comes from going into the unknown, what he's calling the difficult, which fear is difficult. And it's the wonder of it, because often we're afraid. Many times we don't even know what we're afraid of. But going into it starts to reveal it, and it brings energy, it brings life. It brings awareness. And so, like mindfulness, it's really opening to things as they are. When we want to open and investigate the fear without necessarily believing the story that comes with the fear, because all kinds of stories will come. And I've had much fear. I'll say a little more later, but there's a kind of courageousness in just facing the actual aliveness of the fear itself and not being mesmerized by the story that's associated with the fear. Anais Nin, many years ago, she said, the day came when the risk it took to remain tight inside the bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. The risk it took to remain inside the bud was more painful than the risk it took to remain inside the blossom, than the risk it took to blossom. And she's pointing at the courage that comes when we deal with something difficult and it starts to illuminate us. It starts to wake us up. And for myself, I've had many different forms of fear and anxiety and angst and worry and on and on. And I can just give you a few so you believe me a little bit. But even as a boy, I had a very strong reaction to after John F. Kennedy was shot. And many of you might not have been alive when John F. Kennedy was shot, but I was a young teen, preteen now, just turned into my teens. And it was the first time I saw adults really afraid that this American president had been assassinated. And all the adults, all the teachers were afraid. And I got scared. I really got quite scared with all of that. And it shook my trust in reality and in adults, and which is not a horrible thing, to not lose your trust, to lose your trust in adults. But it was very, very strong, very difficult for me. And I quit school for a while, and it was way too young. I was only 14. You can't do that. So there was all kinds of problems that came with that. But it was also very powerful to trust my intuition And then I got put away for a while because you can't quit school. And getting put away was a great thing for me. You know, I had a choice. I could even either go to um, uh, get put in juvenile or go to this get put in this public mental hospital in Detroit. And that was my choice if I wasn't going to go back to school. So I had enough help and sense, especially from one of my brothers, to go to the mental hospital because I wouldn't have made it in juvenile. I was not a tough kid. And and um, and it was very scary to go there. You know, I was on a locked ward, you know, with I don't know 30 other teenagers, an adolescent ward, and it was very scary. And it was great. It was really great. It was really helpful, and it was really a surprise to me because it was going totally out of my world, and it was good. And so it taught me something about fear and going with what's happening and seeing what happens when you do it. And of course, and I've said some of these things over the years when I've been teaching it. When I was a teenager. I was 18 when I moved to New York City from Detroit, and I got mugged 3 times in the first year I lived in New York. And so that brought up some fear. How many people here have been mugged? Not too many, a few. Okay. Yeah, I know that is not fun. I mean, some of it was interesting, but it was not that interesting. I mean, it was only interesting because one time some guys grabbed me and wanted my money, and I had so little money. I was such a poor kid in New York, that they looked at my money. They said, "Oh, you're too poor," and you keep your money. Really, this is true. And then they went on to find someone who had some more money. I'm like, great. And uh, you know, but I spent a lot of time involved with radical left-wing politics in New York in the 60s against the war against racism, against the government. Like we wanted to bring down the government. So there was a lot of demonstrations, a lot of fear running in demonstrations. After the windows get broke, you start running, and it's scary. And and so, you know, a lot of different things when I was young, not so much as an adult these days, but there's still one fear that can be very subtle that I believe most of us have. And the biggest fear is about being real and being ourselves and really seeing what happens if we're really ourselves. We don't go away from ourselves. We don't deny ourselves. We don't try to look good, you know, try to be somebody else for people. And, you know, it takes a while. The fear that people won't like us or will judge us. Hmm. And of course, we can't and sometimes there's no stimulus for the fear. Sometimes people aren't having any judgment about us at all or anything. They aren't even thinking about us and we're worried about it or we're concerned. But but there's other kinds of dukkha. Anybody not know what dukkha means? Dukkha is an important word. Dukkha is another, you're getting the two best Pali words, papancha and dukkha. Dukkha basically means suffering, or it can also be translated as disease, uncomfortableness, unsatisfactoriness. And part of life is dukkha. It's just dukkha, and it's just part of the deal. It's not all of life is dukkha, but life inherent in life is dukkha. And it's one of the great teachings of Buddhism because it's so commonsensical. Because anybody here not have any dukkha? Uh, I mean, it's just part of the human deal. And the word covers everything from, you know, Eugene goes on with the talk for 2 hours and I have to get up and take a piss. That's dukkha. Or wars are dukkha. It's a whole range of reality that is dukkha. Um, okay, what else do I want to say? I forgot here. Biological dukkha, when the bodies don't work right, that's a certain form of dukkha. And of course, prejudice, racial prejudice, religious prejudice, uh, um, um, nationalistic prejudice, historical bias of any kind. That's all dukkha. Hmm. Politics has dukkha in it and brings fear, political exchanges. You know, James Baldwin, the great American writer and philosopher, brilliant, he said, "It is certain in any case that ignorance allied with power, it is certain in any case that ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." I mean, that's the whole Dharma right there about what ignorance actually is. And especially when it's allied with power, and it brings a lot of fear for us individually and into the world. And now we have a new war, or now they're saying it's not a war, it's a one-off, is what I read today. And it's like, but the fear is multiple on this war that's not a war. Um, because I think if the Iranians would have come here and bombed our nuclear facilities, we would have acted like they have attacked us and we were at war. Kind of agree with that, right? But now they're saying, no, it's not war, it's just a one-off. And you can hear the authoritarianism in that believes my side is right and I don't care what actually happened. But this is how I see it. And so you could, reflect about the war, about how it's impacted you, if it scared you at all, or made you angry, or confused you, or if you feel untouched by it. And I swam this morning in the bay, and I went with a friend of mine who goes once in a great while. He's a lawyer, and he came and swam with me, and he's a Buddhist, many years practiced in Zen Center. And I asked him about what he thought about what I was going to talk about tonight and the war. And he said, "Oh yeah, it's all about the Constitution." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, in the Constitution, only the Congress is supposed to declare war." And he said, even after the United States was attacked in 1941 by the government of Japan, um, Franklin Delano Roosevelt asked the Congress to declare war, which is technically what we're supposed to do. But now people don't do that. They just do whatever they want and say, well, I'm not really declaring war, which is what was said today. Right. And my friend's fear is about the total degradation of the Constitution and about the laws that this country has lived by for a long time and has done its best, even though it's not perfect. Mm. And so the fear that can be part of war consciousness or individual consciousness, we want to keep seeing what it's made of and what we can do to metabolize our experience. And I think of a lot of my different fears around practice. And I always have a little fear when I'm going to sit a retreat. Actually, I have a little fear when I'm going to teach a retreat. But I have a little fear even when I'm going to go sit a retreat. Probably more when I'm going to go sit. When I teach, I think I know what's going to happen because I'm doing it, I'm teaching. But when I'm sitting, I don't know. And yeah, I'm going to go. I've got a retreat on my calendar right now for September. And and I'm excited and I'm a little anxious, like I don't know what's going to happen. I've never sat with that teacher before, and we'll see. And it's an interesting um, rub between excitement and fear. They're very closely related psychologically. And so it's important to know that because you can use the energy of fear and it can move you through and beyond the fear. And when the first long retreat I did was at Insight Meditation Society, and I was doing a 6 week sitting, and I had a panic attack one day while I was sitting, and that was very powerful. And I'm a good yogi, so I knew how to work with it. Somehow I knew how to work with it, meaning I just stayed with it, stayed with it, stayed with it. And it was happened. I was doing an hour of standing meditation every day. And it happened while I was doing the standing meditation. And I started feeling the fear and fear, and I almost couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe, panic. I'm noting it. Fear, panic. I can't breathe. And then at some point it went, and it went out my body and into the ground. I was standing outside on the earth and it was gone. And I don't recommend you go for a panic attack or anything, but all I'm saying is it can arise at any time and it's workable. Fear is workable. And sometimes a panic attack means leaving, changing, doing something to get away from the panic. It's not just one way. It's not just you stay with it the whole time. And um, there's a treatise by Mahasi Sayadaw called The Progress of Insight, which is a document that it it um, it it's a writing about the terrain of what happens in very deep practice as you move towards awakening in your heart and mind. And it's called the Progress of Insight. Sounds really good, doesn't it? Progress of Insight. Well, there's all these different stages, many of which are not good. And I was reading something, a guy named Daniel Ingram. How many people know Daniel Ingram? You do. I don't even know him really, but he had an interesting thing about the progress of insight. He had about the fear stage, which is also sometimes called the terror stage. And this is not what they publicize in Buddhism when they want you to come and do meditation, like, oh, here's how you get to awakening, is you go through terror. But it's something that happened. And he said the degree of fear that people experience in the fear state can vary wildly. Some people can suddenly experience extremely powerful feelings of abject terror for no obvious reason at all. And if we fear the fact of fear, blah, 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 he says other stuff. On the mild side, this stage might manifest as just a slightly heightened sense of nonspecific panic or anxiety. And I have had that stage in a long retreat I've done, but it lasted a number of days, the fear, and it was really afraid I wasn't going to survive. That was the fear. And so interesting to see what he had to say. He did end it nicely. He said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, which we've all heard that quote. And it's a really good quote. Where am I? Okay, time-wise. And then maybe the last, oh yeah, well, I'm almost out of time. So last thing I want to say is just that one of the great practices of dealing with fear is love and loving kindness, and really doing loving kindness practice, which is done many ways. You can say phrases of loving kindness, or you can just radiate loving kindness to yourself or to others. Sometimes people start by radiating loving kindness to a mentor or somebody it's very easy to send loving feelings towards. And the the phrase that is in the basic loving kindness practice that I love is called, may I be safe, protected, free from the inner and outer harm. And the short version is, may I be safe. And that's really what all fear is speaking to. Are we safe or not safe? Are we okay or not okay? May I be safe. May I be safe, protected, free from inner or outer harm. And then there are other kinds of phrases you can use in order to discover the fearlessness of being here. May I find freedom from fear in my life. Or may I help others find freedom from fear in their life. Or may I meet the fear in our culture with the fearlessness of an open heart. Hmm. And I have a lot of great quotes to end with. Which one should I end with? Hmm. I'll give you a Trungpa Rinpoche. Trungpa Rinpoche. Trungpa Rinpoche was actually the Tibetan monk who started Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein teaching in 1974, something like that, teaching Vipassana in the West. And Trungpa was a wild guy who had escaped out of Tibet after the Chinese government took over that country when he was, I think, 17 or something, and he walked over the Himalayas to escape that kind of abuse, and then created centers all over the world. And he said, fearlessness is the absence of cowardice. He says, fearlessness is the absence of cowardice or uncertainty. And fearless or uncertainty, or I see what he's saying, cowardice or uncertainty comes from speed, from not being on the spot, from not being able to lead a life properly and fully. You miss a lot of details, and you also miss the overview which the Dharma gives us. You miss a lot of details and you miss the overview. To correct that, you need room for fearlessness, which comes from having faith in your existence. And really what he's saying is faith in this moment of you being alive right here. And he goes on, basically speaking, fearlessness is not particularly a reward or goal, but fearlessness is part of the journey on the path. Fearlessness alternates with fear, and both of those are kindling for the fire. You are nervous, speedy, fearful, and that brings another area of steadiness, solidity, and calm. So fear and fearlessness constantly alternate. And he's someone who knows about fear, really. I read the stories of him escaping from Tibet and being pursued by the, Chinese military and hiding, in ice caves and things like that in the cold and surviving. Hey, everybody, for those who are, we'll just take a moment, appreciating this moment that we're here together, that we have the good fortune to be together and study the Dharma together and learn together and wake up together, even with fear. May all beings be happy and peaceful. May all beings be safe, protected, free from inner and outer harm. May all beings awaken and be free. Thank you, everybody. Good to be with you all.